Welcome to another edition of the ADP Show, brought to you by everybody over at DynastyLeagueFootball.com. I'm Dan Myler. With me, as he was last week, Ryan McDowell. Ryan, how's it going?
Going really well, Dan. How are you?
I'm great. Ryan, of course, a big-time writer, Dynasty guy, collects a lot of ADP, average draft position information for DynastyLeagueFootball.com. So we get together once a week to talk about that ADP right here on the ADP Show. Last week, Ryan, we covered round one of Dynasty rookie ADP that you collect. This week, we thought it'd be proper to head on over to round two. We're going to cover these tiers. Before we get to that, though, we should talk a little bit about the website, DynastyLeagueFootball.com. Lots of great stuff happening over there. Of course, you can find Ryan and my rookie rankings. You can find this rookie ADP that we're about to talk about. And then there's great content hitting the site every day, Ryan. Everything talking about these rookies, these landing spots, and all the things that we are thinking about as Dynasty owners right now, as these rookie drafts start up and as they really play out.
Yeah, absolutely. This is our time of year, right? We've got ADP, as you mentioned, rookie ADP. We're pulling ADP from our mock drafts, from My Fantasy League. There's almost 600 My Fantasy League rookie drafts in our database. Occasionally over the months and the years, I hear some people talk about our mock draft ADP and have some concerns about a small sample size. And I get that. We base this ADP on 10 rookie mocks. We base our monthly startup ADP on 6 mock drafts. So I understand that concern. That's not a concern with our MFL ADP, though, because again, we're talking about several hundred actual drafts that are taking place. So whether you want the data, whether you want some content, some suggestions on who to pick or what we think of these players, all that content is there at DLF waiting for you.
Yeah, it's all right there, DynastyLeagueFootball.com. Let's talk a little bit about round two of that rookie ADP, Ryan, because last week we talked about the tiers and it broke down to a few different tiers. This week, it's going to do the same thing in round two, and it starts right at the top, that top pick in round two with a bunch of wide receivers.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's necessary to continue this talk into round two, as you mentioned, because the theme of this entire class really for years is the depth. The depth of this class is what separates it from others. So first round discussion last week was great, but we've got to dig a little deeper because we know we can get some real impact players in rounds 2 and beyond. So let's look at round 2. I see at the top a pretty clear tier of 5 players, and they're all wide receivers. So we see at the top 2.01 T. Higgins. Interesting enough that he also went 2.01 in the NFL draft. That was his draft position by the Cincinnati Bengals. So he tops the second round with an ADP of 14 overall. Actually, a little bit of a drop from our pre-draft ADP for Higgins, who was looking like a first rounder prior to the draft. So he takes a couple spot hit and now is at 2.01 with that ADP of 14. He's followed by Denzel Mims, 14.3. So obviously just fractions of a point behind, who also dropped a couple spots. So both Mims and Higgins were being valued or being thought of as first round dynasty rookie picks. And they take a little bit of a hit. I think that mostly has to do with some other players like Keyshawn Vaughn that we talked about last week, leapfrogging them, not necessarily a negative for either Higgins or Mims. The other wide receivers in this top tier, and it takes us down to the 2.05 pick, is Brandon Ayuk at 2.03, Michael Pittman at 2.04, and Bryan Edwards at 2.05. All three of those players are post-draft risers. Ayuk up 4 spots, Pittman up 6 spots, and Bryan Edwards up 2 spots.
Yeah, it's an interesting tier for sure. Interesting that it's all wide receivers that fall between 14 and 16 really in ADP. And then also there's just so similar players, so similar of value. This draft class, as we've talked about so much, is so deep. Before we move on to the second tier of round 2, Ryan, we should mention quickly that final guy in round 1 from last week. That was Joe Burrow. He had an ADP of 13.5, so just a little bit higher than T. Higgins. You could probably say, if you were looking at this outside of the construct that we're using round by round, that's probably a tier of about 6 players, with Burrow having a similar one as the 5 receivers you mentioned.
Yeah, very good point. A little bit of a gap there from Henry Ruggs, who was our 1.11 pick, to Burrow. Actually, according to our ADP, a difference of 3 positions between the 11 and the 12 pick. So pretty significant there, actually. And yeah, outside of the top 12 versus the next 12, Burrow actually would belong, just according to his ADP, in this tier of 5 wide receivers. The other one that I thought is probably worth talking about is Michael Pittman, because this happens every year. We collect this data immediately after the draft. And even though nothing has happened since the draft, sometimes we have rookie mini camps. That's obviously not the case this year. But the buzz is already starting to build on Michael Pittman. So according to this data, he's 2.04. I think if you're starting a draft today, I wouldn't count on him falling that far. I think he's already overtaken Brandon Ayuk, maybe Denzel Mims as well. So he's going to be closer to the top of that second round based on what I'm seeing and some buzz starting to build around him.
Yeah, great point there, Ryan. Let's talk about this tier 2 in round 2. We talked about it being between about 14 and 16 in ADP, those 5 receivers in tier 1. After that, we dropped down just a little bit. There's 3 players in this second tier of round 2.
Yeah, and this is a kind of an odd tier in the middle of the second round. It starts with Zach Moss, who was another post-draft faller. I think many people were hoping for a good landing spot, maybe the Buccaneers for him. We know that didn't happen. He does land with the Buffalo Bills, where he could see a role but share that backfield with Devin Singletary. His ADP of 18.5 represents a 4-spot drop from the pre-draft ADP. So pretty significant hit for him. 2.07 is Laviska Shenault, the wide receiver for the Jags. This one confuses me a little bit. I feel like personally Shenault belongs in that top tier with Ayuk and Mims and Bryan Edwards, some of those guys. But he took a pretty big hit post-draft. He drops over 4 spots down to the 2.07 to an ADP of 18.7. I know there were injury concerns, but that hasn't changed since the draft. The landing spot is not great, but it's the draft capital we expected, maybe even better than we expected. So I guess there's just that much concern with the Jaguars as a franchise right now that Shenault takes the big hit. And then the final player in this tier, 2.08, is Tua Tagovailoa. 19.3 is his ADP. That shows a small drop of about 1.5 spots or 1.5 points from pre-draft. A little confused on this one as well. Just the gap between Burrow, who we said was that 1.12 pick in our data, versus Tua at 2.08. I don't see that big of a gap between them. I kind of feel like once you get to that point in your draft where it's quarterback time, you'll see Burrow and Tua coming off the board. Maybe back-to-back or very close, but here there's a decent size gap.
Yeah, decent size gap indeed. And you mentioned off the top that's kind of an odd tier really with Moss and then Shenault and Tua. We mix in the different positions, of course. The third tier, players 21 through 24 in DLF's ADP, that stabilizes just a little bit. Once again, some running backs, a wide receiver. Talk to me about the 4 players that make up this third tier of round 2 in rookie ADP for me.
Sure. This final tier of 4 players, really shows how not only how deep the draft is, but how flat it gets at this point. So our 2.09 pick is Antonio Gibson. He got that surprising draft capital early in the third round, drafted by the Redskins. His ADP is 24.2. But what is noteworthy for Gibson and really for every player in this tier is the wide range. He went as early as 19 overall, but he went as late as 31 overall in our 10 mock drafts. So it's honestly tough to nail down an exact draft position or where you should target Antonio Gibson. But I would say it's this point at the earliest where you would want to start looking at him in a typical draft. And we see that wide range with all four of these players, all four in at least one mock dropped into the 30 range. The next player is AJ Dillon at 2.10. And he's actually, of this group, the only faller. He took a major drop of almost 8 spots. So pre-draft, he was being viewed as a high second rounder. Again, kind of like we talked about with Zach Moss, hoping for the ideal landing spot where he could be an immediate impact player, maybe even an immediate starter. That's not going to happen in Green Bay, though. Depending on how you feel about that backfield, maybe you view him as the 2021 starter. I think he's actually, as surprising as that pick was by the Packers, I think he's actually a value at 2.10, even with that big drop. The next two players are two of the biggest risers in this tier, actually the two biggest risers. Darrynton Evans jumps all the way up to 2.11, basically moves from a late third rounder to a late second rounder, drafted by the Tennessee Titans, and maybe being viewed as that change of pace back to Derrick Henry, taking over the role for Dion Lewis. His ADP is 24.9. So again, that just shows you the small gap, 24.2 for Gibson, 24.3 for Dillon, 24.9 for Evans, all three of those potential backup running backs. And then ending the second round is Chase Claypool, drafted in the second round by the Pittsburgh Steelers. His ADP is 25.6. He jumps about half a round from pre-draft, from a mid-third rounder to a late second rounder. And you know, he's going to be a tough one to figure what his role is with that deep Steelers wide receiver depth chart. But he offers something that the other guys don't. So we could see some immediate playing time for him as well.
Absolutely. Ryan, before we get out of here, we should talk about the players that just missed the cut for round 2. So we're talking about these guys in tiers, of course. Just like we talked about at the top, that Burrow belongs maybe with that top tier of round 2. There are a handful of players that could be considered in the same tier for the bottom of round 2, tier 3, because their ADP falls just short of Claypool at 25.6.
Yeah, I don't think we're not likely to do a round 3 version of this. We'll probably be moving on to startup ADP next week, but this tier actually extends, I would say, all the way to the middle of the third round or maybe deeper. We're talking about KJ Hamler at the 3.01 pick. His ADP is 26 compared to 25.6 for Claypool. So a very, very small difference. And that small gap continues all the way down to 32 overall. So beyond the middle of the third round, Lynn Bowden, Anthony McFarland, Justin Herbert, Van Jefferson, Joshua Kelly, Tyler Johnson, Devin Duvernay, all in that same tier. And that's what I was talking about with this last group. It's really flat. Guys like Gibson and Dillon and Evans, you might have to spend that late second, but you might get lucky and grab them in the middle of the third round as well.
Right. It's just such a deep class. There's so much talent. And the fact that you can get some of those names in the third round, Ryan, that's just a bargain. As you mentioned, next week, Ryan, we're probably going to talk about startup ADP. We're not just a rookie ADP show, although the first 2 episodes covered the topic. We'll move on to some of that startup ADP. We'll also mix in Superflex talk over the coming weeks. If you enjoyed the show, hit the like and subscribe button. I appreciate each of you watching. For Ryan, I'm Dan. Thanks for watching the ADP show, brought to you by DynastyLeagueFootball.com. We'll catch you again next week.